Hello and welcome to another episode of the Relentless Watchman podcast. Today, I wanted to speak about a case out of Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas that involves the shooting of a young lady. I do not want to mispronounce her first name, but her last name is Jefferson. This is out of Fort Worth Police Department in Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas. The incident began when a neighbor by the name of James Smith made a call to the Fort Worth Police Department after observing, I believe, two of the front doors leading to the residence of Miss Jefferson's home open. Since this was unusual, Mr. Smith had concern that something might not be right. He initially walked over to the residence, looked through the doors, and didn't see any movement. That increased his concern and led to him calling the police department. In his communication to the police department, he made them aware that there were two doors open to the residence and that this was unusual. He didn't mention anything about there being any type of domestic situation, any noises that would lead him to believe that maybe a home invasion or burglary had occurred or anything of that nature. He just stated to the dispatcher that he just wanted to make sure that his neighbor was okay. According to what I have observed via the body cam footage that the police have already made available to the public, the officer, maybe two officers, because he's speaking at a low tone, which might mean that he's communicating with another officer on scene, or it's possible that he could have been communicating to the dispatcher. That, at least to me, is unknown at this time. What is apparent is that he actually approached and opened at least one of the doors leading to the residence and never verbally attempted to make contact with that resident. He continued to walk around the house, shining a flashlight into the home. Being a homeowner myself, if I'm either awakened or even if I'm awake and I become aware of a flashlight being shined into my home, my first thought would be that it's a person potentially attempting to make a forced entry into my home, possible home invasion, possible burglary attempt. We do not know exactly how this young lady responded, but we do know that upon the officer observing the presence of the woman, he immediately pointed his weapon, gave verbal commands, and fired almost immediately upon issuing that command. Now, what is not known at this time is whether or not the resident of that home, who is now deceased, whether or not that young lady had a weapon. What is concerning, what's most concerning, and what stands out the most in regards to this case is the fact that no communication was issued by the police. As far as my law enforcement career and my many, possibly hundreds of responses to similar incidents, the first thing that you want to do is establish contact to assure that it's a situation where somebody to basically not even to be sure, but to find out what the situation is, because you don't have enough information to make a decision either way with a phone call stating that a person is interested in checking on the well-being. Now, standard response to a well-being check or a well-being call would be to establish communication with someone in that residence to find out if there is someone at the residence. I've personally had experiences where I've received an almost identical call. I'll respond to the residents. I'll try to make verbal communication. Upon not receiving any feedback to that verbal communication and the availability of an entrance without having to force an entrance, I would enter the residence and continue to attempt to make contact with a person. It could be a situation where a person is in some type of distress involving their health, where they might need emergency services, EMT, emergency medical services. Or it could be a situation where a crime has been committed and the person is either unconscious or possibly even deceased, but not being able to clarify either means that you're going to come with the mindset, you're going to approach the situation with the mindset that this is not, we don't know what it is. We don't know the exact appropriate response that's necessary. So, of course, we will take precautions, but the first thing we want to do is establish communication if there's anyone within that residence. And there's two ways that this can help you. If it's an innocent situation where a person maybe just left their door unlocked, I can think of one situation that I've actually approached where the person left in an emergency and failed to lock their doors upon exiting their home. Possibly a miscommunication between maybe several people where they thought the other person had locked the doors. So upon the return from the emergency, I actually established contact with neighbors to find out, okay, is everything okay? Did you see anything? Oh yeah, she went out. She didn't lock her door. I'm like, no. All right. If you are, okay with at least standing outside, I'd like to just make sure that the home is clear. And then, if you don't mind assisting me in securing it, and if you could watch out for it, give us a call back if something happens. That would really help us out. And you proceed with the call that way. I've actually had situations as well where there was a person that came in, they were intoxicated, and they passed out. And in their intoxicated state, they didn't think to secure doors to their home. They left food on, lights on, and everything. So once again, established communication with the person, made sure that they were okay, verified that they lived at the home, cut off their stove, the eye to their stove and all, and help them secure their home before we left. Standard response to a well-being check. Nothing, if you have no pre-indicator of any type of something that might be foul, some type of foul circumstances, there is not, in my humble opinion, a reason for you to approach this type of situation with guns drawn. Guns drawn can be, or let's say you feel as though, because you don't know what it is, you feel as though guns drawn would be the appropriate response. Even in that case, you still, your mindset should be, I don't know what's going on. I need to find out. I need more information before I decide that a use of deadly force is necessary, because I could be using this deadly force against the lawful resident of this home. No attempt during their canvassing of the exterior of the home there was no attempt made to contact a person on the inside. It could have been as simple as cracking the door, like is easily observed from the video available from that officer's body cam, and shouting the police department or sheriff's department that they represented. I believe in this case is Fort Worth Police. Officer Doe, Fort Worth Police Department, is anybody home? Make that exclamation several times to see if there's any response. If you don't hear response, make it again. Officer Doe, Fort Worth Police Department, we're doing a well-being check. We are going to enter your home. If you are in the home, this is the police. Please be aware. Please don't use any force against us. 9 times out of 10, the woman was obviously awake. If she hears someone saying police, she could just return a reply and say, yes, somebody's in the house, and then they could go further. What is your name, ma'am? Would you mind bringing your ID to the front door? You could still use the cover of the outside of the door, where you don't stand in the actual doorway, to observe that person coming from a safe distance in a safe area without exposing yourself to harm. That is, in my opinion, the proper response to a well-being check. Not to walk around the house whispering as if you're responding to maybe a burglary in progress. You don't have burglary in progress information. After you find out, let's say you find out that, okay, yeah, that person's in here, you verify that is their home, you make sure that they are okay, the call is over with. If the opposite happens, where you have to enter into the home, you make sure that people in the house know that you've entered the home. You might come upon a person who, for whatever reason, did not hear, who might be startled. You can still approach that situation using the doorways, quick peeking around them, continuing to verbally attempt to make contact to assure that they know that you are the police and that you are not a burglar. Now, looking at the situation from the opposite side, I am sure that if I saw a person walking around whispering outside of my house, that I would believe that it was a threat. One thing that I would recommend, and I've done this in classes, anyone who's ever taking a class with me, especially of home defense, would know that I would not want to expose myself because you don't know what type of threat exists outside. And this is not, I don't want anybody to believe that, okay, this is an attempt to discredit the young lady who lost her life. This is an attempt to assure that situations like this do not happen again. Because we have to do whatever we can to assure our safety. Whether or not this is a police officer, and if you do not know the intent of the person, it could be a domestic situation. We see that happen all the time. I would not want to give that person the advantage of seeing me and having a full silhouette or a target for them to, if their intent is to harm me, to be able to use whatever means that they have in order to harm me. What I have trained in home defense is if you hear something outside, do not completely open your blinds. Do not turn on any lights. Make sure you have your phone with you. Move your loved ones. If you have children, especially for my single parent mothers, if you have children, move them to a location where you can lock and possibly barricade. To verify who or what is outside, a very discreet, maybe cracking if you have blinds, a very discreet crack of the blinds, just enough to be able to peer out without that person on the outside observing your presence, if possible. If you have curtains or drapes, looking through the corner of the drapes or curtains slightly to be able to identify whether or not it's a person who could be a threat to you. This is just something that I believe that people should know in order to keep ourselves safe. Moving forward, whenever there's a situation that occurs like this, I can reference prior, about a year or a little bit more than a year ago, we had the Draca McLaughlin incident out of Florida. And when this incident occurred, the first thing I did is look at the state statute regarding the use of force and the stand your ground law, or no duty to retreat law. One thing that I noticed in that case was that he was acting outside of the scope of a normal citizen. In a situation like that, should have been a situation where he contacted police. Of course, this would have been a low priority call, which would not elicit or warrant an immediate response. Because, it's a parking violation. There's a whole lot going on in cities that deserve police attention, more so than a parking violation. But Mr. Glocklin took it upon himself to approach a woman due to a parking violation. So the first thing that came to mind, and people that either communicate with me regularly, have taken courses that I've taught, or just maybe even listened to a prior podcast or saw or read a blog. The first thing I thought of is that he's acting outside of that scope of a citizen. He's crossing over into law enforcement. So had I been involved in the case as a police officer, or I think that was a sheriff department, the first thing I would have done is look at the state statute involving impersonation of police. After reading that statute, if my memory serves me correct, I remember it stating something to the effect that even if you take on the responsibility or the duty of a police officer, that can be considered impersonation. And in the Stand Your Ground statute, it stated that you could not be the initial aggressor. And that is what I viewed Draca as being. He was the initial aggressor. He did not have to approach and start a verbal disagreement / argument with an individual over a parking violation. Then I place myself in every person's position when I look at cases. I looked at it from his concern as a concerned citizen, being concerned about a parking violation, which is a low priority thing. Even if you wanted to communicate your displeasure or your passion about making sure that disabled people have parking available for them, there's a way that you can do it that does not elicit an argument. And if it does become a situation where it transforms over to that argument state, it would be very easy to disengage and to leave that area. That is what I teach. I happen to call it ego suppression. Don't let people with their nasty attitudes, their nasty behavior, dispositions, and communication pull you in. Don't let them emotionally pull you in to something that could have a snowball effect, which in this very case, it definitely did, where you cannot get yourself out of. Now, Michael Draca, if I'm not mistaken, his first name, but I believe he just received 20 years for that incident. 20 years, like, is 20 years worth your perceived disrespect or your passion about a parking violation? I would think that the average citizen would say that it is not. Looking at the purview of the woman that was in the car, I know that if a citizen came up to me and expressed concern, I would say, you know what, I understand your concern. I'm sorry. I'll move over a parking space or what have you, because I'm interested in disengaging. I realize, of course, that I'm wrong. And I realize that you have a concern. It's not that important to me to engage you in an argument. I actually would just like to have you out of my face. Realizing I did wrong, wanting you out of my face, it would be very easy for me to back up, pull right, and go right into a spot. And then you're gone and the situation is over with. Everybody doesn't have that type of personality and or training, however you want to refer to it as. So people respond differently. And I would respect that on either side. But of course, I'm not everybody. I don't know the particulars about what her response, what her communication is. I definitely will be researching it when the time does permit. But what I do know is that it wasn't that serious on either side. I definitely wouldn't have exited my car to place myself in harm's way during the course of an argument. I believe that was a very bad decision, and that staying in that car could have actually gone forth or could have put all parties in a position where it could have just been something that everybody walked away from. Not to blame the incident on her, but I definitely know that did not make it any better. Looking from McGlockton's point of view, if I exit a store and see a man in my wife's face, I'm going to assume that this person is threatening or can cause some type of physical threat to my wife or girlfriend, in his case, or fiance, I believe. My immediate action would be to make sure that threat isn't realized. So in his case, I saw nothing wrong with him coming to her aid. removing him away from his fiance's face, preventing her from becoming a victim of that person's aggression. Especially, you have no idea who this person is or what they're capable of. Now, what the jury saw is the same thing I did. After pushing that man to the ground, Draker drew a weapon. McGlockton stepped backwards. That was something that the jury could not get over. They were looking at the fact, did he not have an opportunity to say force is not needed? And they stated that, yes, he had an opportunity. Once that man stepped back, he was no longer a threat. Nothing was imminent. He was not in imminent danger. It could have been as simple as a brandish giving, the verbal command or direction to not approach me. And that would have been it. That could have been as far as the stand your ground that you needed. You are preventing yourself from becoming a victim, a further victim, if that's your perception, of great bodily harm or potential death. I remember him stating that he was handicapped, but he wasn't 50 years old, but what can we say about that? And at any rate, I did the same thing with this case, looking into Fort Worth Police Department's general orders. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with general orders, it is basically a published set of directives which are given by either military or paramilitary, like a law enforcement agency, to all of the personnel. And it's a guideline. It's policy and procedure and enforcement of those policies and procedures. In the military, you could be subject to court-martial. In civilian police departments, firing, or they might have a set, or I would say most have a set of days that you can be suspended, or up to possibly even years of suspension that could be given depending on the offense of the general order and how egregious it is. So basically, general orders are policies and procedures for military and civilian police departments. Now, in looking at these general orders, I was attempting to find one that dealt specifically with use of force incidents. Well, I was able to find use of force incidents, but I was looking specifically for a general order dealing with a well-being check. That particular language I did not find in their general orders, which are approximately about 420 pages worth of information. So is it possible that I did miss it? Yes, that is possible. I think I did a thorough enough, investigation into whether or not those existed in their general orders, but like I said, it's still possible that I may have overlooked it. Now, what I did find was a particular set that came very close, or that were directly related to this incident. One of them was General Order 327.05. which dealt with open doors. When I looked into that, it referred me to the General Order 327.01, which dealt with silent alarms. And it basically said that when dealing with open doors, you treat it as a silent alarm. I also looked up investigation calls, which actually dealt with the detective unit being deployed for investigations. So that was not directly related to this particular case out of Fort Worth. And these are Fort Worth's general orders, just to clarify that. 306.06 dealt with the use of deadly force. And 321.08 dealt with the investigation of cases, which was also related to the detective units and them being deployed for investigations. So what I was left was with dealing with open doors, which referred me to silent alarms, and of course the use of force. So I am going to go to these particular general orders and read their content. Now, 306.06 is the use of deadly force. It states that, quote, "The use of deadly force is authorized only when it is necessary for officers to protect themselves or others from an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury. Justification for the use of deadly force shall be limited to the facts known or reasonably perceived by an officer at the time the incident occurs. Regardless of the nature of the crime or the justification for the use of deadly force, officers must at all times remember their basic responsibility is to protect the public. Therefore, except to preserve life or to prevent serious bodily injury, officers shall not fire their weapon under circumstances that would subject other officers, bystanders, or hostages to death or possible injury. Firing a weapon under such conditions is not justified unless the failure to do so at the time would create a substantially greater and immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury." 327.05 deals with open doors and windows. Open doors and windows shall be investigated as silent alarms, with the officers eliminating all means of escape prior to beginning their search of the building. 327.01, which deals with silent alarm, states that the officer receiving the call on a silent alarm shall be responsible for the coordination and placement of other units also responding to the scene. All main exitways should be guarded so as to prevent the escape of any offender. The unit in charge of the call shall inspect the structure to determine if there is any sign of forced entry. That is significant in dealing with this case. If officers find signs of forced entry or have any reason to believe that a burglar may still be in the building, they shall keep all exits under surveillance and call for assistance from available K-9 units and for any additional units required to secure the building. If the building shows no sign of forced entry, officers shall keep the building under surveillance and have the Police Information Center contact the owner of the building and or alarm company reporting the alarm. If contact is made with the owner and An owner or authorized agent shall be requested to make the scene so that officers may conduct a routine inspection of the inside of the structure. If the building appears secure and the owner of the alarm company representative shall not be making the scene or shall be delayed by more than 20 minutes, the officer shall clear the call and return to service. The complainant shall be advised to contact the police communication division upon their arrival at the scene so officers may return to their location. Now it goes on to talk about structures that aren't secure and whether the fact that officers should attempt to secure the building if possible. This really does not provide the type of direction that is necessary to deal with a situation where there's a well-being check. And that's one thing that you will find across the board when dealing with general orders. There's not a directive for every single situation that you'll encounter as the police. So a little bit of common sense coupled with care will have to be deployed in order to be effective. And this situation just irks me because of the fact that, to me, basic common sense was abandoned. When you have the initial caller stating what he expects that more aligns with a proper police response, and you have a trained police officer that does something that I think will perplex the average citizen and the average police officer. What do you do in a situation like that? Now, I often say that most people aren't cut out for the work of a police officer. It is a very demanding position that can be mentally, physically draining. And you have to be able to always place the best interest of the public into consideration, even in split seconds, in making a decision. You could have a person who pulls a gun on you, and you still have to consider the people behind that person. And you will have to position yourself in a place where, if when you do return fire, no other people can be harmed. Those are the type of decisions that police officers have to make, and you have to do it in milliseconds. Everybody does not have the ability to be able to do that effectively. In this situation, it's just unimaginable what could have been going through the officer's mind in order to respond in the way that he did respond. You would think that nature would dictate the fact that you would attempt to communicate with the person before approaching the situation, because you're just being told that doors are open at the residence and it's unusual. You don't know any of the circumstances, so you would think that your first response would be a fact-finding mission to gain more information to assure that you deploy the appropriate response. Once you find out that there's a person in distress, you will act upon that type of situation. If you find out that there could be a hostage situation or a situation where harm is being caused to another person, then you would adjust your response to accommodate the situation or incident that you're approaching. approaching this situation, this incident, with guns drawn, making no attempt to contact anyone within the home, and doing a perimeter check and using flashlights to look into different windows, it just makes no sense. And I'm hoping that we get information that actually clarifies what was going through this police officer's mind. I hope that we get it very soon. I mean, it would not make it a justified shooting, in my opinion. But at least we will know what we're dealing with, so we can prepare other officers who will respond to similar incidents with enough information to prevent this type of tragedy from happening again. As always, it's our duty, it's our mission to make and keep people safe. So when we have incidents like this, tragic, unimaginable incidents that result in the loss of precious life, we look at it, we investigate, we get as much information as possible in order to assure that it doesn't happen again. We take all the measures possible, mitigation measures to training measures to make sure that the next officer approaching this situation approaches it with the correct mindset to assure that an innocent life is not lost. That's our mission, and that's one thing that we're going to continue to give a lot of attention to. Unfortunately, in law enforcement, there's a culture that says, okay, if you weren't there, you don't know what was going on. You don't understand what the officers saw. So therefore, you can't make a judgment upon it. And I believe that fails police officers as a whole, because it's basically placing you in a position where your actions can't be judged. And there's no way to improve upon your skill, your proficiency as a police officer if you're not subject to any type of correction. If people cannot have an opinion on your action because of some type of cultural unspoken rule, and we're going to continue on this show to break the rules, to challenge police officers to do better work, because that is an issue among police. It's unfortunately a position that requires so much. And one of the things, in my opinion, that it requires is that you can't make the mistakes that other people make in the course of their employment, because your mistakes lead to death. Your mistakes can lead to false imprisonment. Your mistakes can lead to a person receiving great bodily harm that was innocent, and that harm should have never come to them. So we don't have the ability to make mistakes like other people have. We have to perfect our craft. And the only way that we can do so is if that we information share, if we look on incidents and come to a consensus that that is an improper way of handling an incident that way, and let others behind us learn from these incidents and become more proficient in their duties, whereby they don't make these same mistakes. there are going to be different opinions that come out, but looking at this incident, it was one where he made a split-second decision. He could not process the fact that this person was anything. You know, a lot of people are going to say, oh, he did it because she's that. He did it because of this. It is my personal, humble opinion that he did it because from the beginning, the wrong approach to this incident was deployed. And it just continued to go downhill to the point that it led to the loss of life, which is I mean, it's words can't express it. But we do know that it shouldn't have happened. This should never have happened. And if we're able to come to that consensus as law enforcement officers, as security officers, as agents, come to that consensus and assure that the people that we work with have that same mind. If we revisit our approach, possibly our training, because I'm not sure, since there's no general order that I found that specifically relates to this particular incident, then there's a possibility that maybe there is no direction on how those incidents should be handled, which is something that could be possibly addressed in training. But we all know how departments approach training. There has to be meetings. There has to go through the legal end of it before this stuff can be approved. It has to go through many different channels before it's actually on the books as a training exercise. So in the interim, we train ourselves and each other. And this forum will be one where police officers, security officers, anybody who is tasked with the safety, security of people and their property, and who are in positions where they may have to use of force, we need to make sure that they understand how to properly approach situations to prevent the loss of life. And I will continue through this forum to make those challenges. And if it pisses people off, I don't care. Hopefully it pisses them off to the point where they want to do better. And then we could end these senseless tragedies of these egregious errors in law enforcement judgment that lead to the loss of life. On that note, I'm going to close out this particular podcast installment, and I just want to impress upon the minds of any and all listeners: do not neglect your personal duty as a member of the community. Make sure that you put pressure on these agencies, these police departments, to do the job correctly and be relentless with it. Because this is something that cannot happen. It cannot continue to happen. And it will if the people allow it to. I thank you once again for watching the Relentless Watchman, or listening to the Relentless Watchman podcast. And I hope that you are relentless in the safety and the security of your community, its residents, and that you are relentless in your pursuit of justice for all. Thank you.